Well, good morning or good afternoon, whichever the case may be. I'm Daryl Ferguson, Director of Performance Management, and we want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. We've got a lot of folks that are still logging in, so we're going to give everybody just about 30 more seconds and we'll get started with the presentation. So we've got a few more people coming in, so we're going to get started with the presentation here in about maybe 15, 20 seconds. All right, well, looks like the logins are starting to slow down a little bit. So again, I'm Daryl Ferguson, Director of Performance Management with Xtime. We're so happy to have you here today. We've got a great webinar for you today that is going to be delivered by Gerald Gregory. Before we get started, I wanted to go into a little bit of housekeeping because we've got so many folks logged in. We do have everybody on mute in the audience because dealerships are loud places. So we want to make sure that we can hear Gerald's presentation clearly today. We also have a new control panel in webinar, and it's going to give you the ability to download a PDF version of the presentation. So that's one of the big questions we generally get is, how do I get a copy? Well, it's real simple. If you look in your control panel on your right-hand side, you'll see handouts 1 of 5. Just click that, and you can easily grab that and download that PDF if you'd like a copy of today's presentation. We'll also record the presentation, so you received a reminder about an hour ago from me reminding you of today's webinar. If you do want a copy of the recording of the presentation, about 2 hours after the presentation today, I'll have a recording available. And if you'll just email me, just reply back to that email, I'll be happy to send you a copy of the presentation. Last thing of housekeeping, we're going to get started, is questions. You also have a question bar, a couple of ticks up from the handouts in the control panel. Put all your questions in there. We want to hear your questions, and we'll stop periodically throughout the presentation to answer those questions. We want to be as interactive as we can. So with that, I really appreciate everybody's attendance today. I'm going to hand it over to Gerald Gregory. He's one of our managers of performance management on our team that works with dealers all across the country. So Gerald, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Daryl. All right, so welcome everyone to maximizing profits through an efficient inspection process. On today's agenda, we're going to take a look at the efficiencies as far as training goes. So a lot of times an area where we don't necessarily spend a ton of time at a dealership traditionally is on training for efficiency. So we're going to take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at refocusing on the express lane process. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and a huge percentage of our RO count moves through that express lane. So it's oftentimes an area where we want to refocus our efforts to really make sure that we're maximizing that experience. And then we're going to touch on communication and how we can improve our communication process to speed up the ability to move those repair orders through the inspection process. And then, like anything, when we're working on improving anything, we're going to take a look at some reports to just understand how we can set benchmarks and monitor our progress through the reporting that we have available within Inspect. So first up, the express lane. When we talk about the express lane, who benefits the most from that express lane experience? And then who is our competition for express lane service? And then what is their process like? So we'll take a deep dive into looking at what the competition's doing and then how we can improve that express lane experience. But before we take a look at that, we always want to start with the customer experience, right? So here's a chart from a study that Cox Automotive did a few years back. And it highlights the top frustrations with the customer experience as it relates to having their vehicle serviced, right? So, we have 30% of our customers stating that the service took longer than expected. And so that's where our ability to be efficient in having processes in place will help reduce that time that they're in for service. Next, 20% of the customers, upsell. They were presented with additional services, and they felt like we were trying to push those services. So when we think about that 20% of the customer clientele, that's where media comes into play, right? Multimedia. If I'm able to show you, you can see, touch, feel, we can generally overcome that objection and reduce that frustration. And then having to wait for an appointment when they had an appointment, we've typically already addressed that in most situations with most of our service departments by having the express advisor, a separate lane for express versus the main shop. So we've put things in place to overcome that objection as well. And then, 10% of the customers are frustrated about how much we charge for that. I think we've really done a great job as an industry in addressing that as well with price transparency. There's really nothing hidden anymore when you think about your express experience. Most of them are family priced or menu priced, and it's readily available for the customer to see. And then there's always that transportation option there. So it is what it is, but most of our highlines, we have made some progress there with offering loaner vehicles and things like that. We have the lift, pickup, and delivery. So transportation, really, for that 10% of the customer clientele that responded to this, we've offered a solution to that problem as well. So I wanted to just take a second to kind of look at the sentiments as far as what they were expecting from us. With that being said, what are the benefits of the express lane service? Well, for the dealership, customer retention, tech development, and increased profit potential. When you think about your express service departments, this is the area that oftentimes we get those entry-level techs or techs that are currently going through some type of vocation school or professional training through one of the universities that offer, technician training. It's a great way to get them in the building and start their development and progress them as they are doing their classroom education. So a great way to continue to conquest for technicians and develop them in-house. And then customer retention. It's not often that we get to see the customer, but that express service and being able to provide an efficient process that's consistent will lead to the customer thinking about coming back to your dealership top of mind rather than going to the competition. For the customer, there's two real main things that are most important to them, and that's the time and the convenience. So if we're consistent, they're going to benefit from the fact that they can expect that, okay, if he says it's 45 minutes, it's consistently been 45 minutes over the last few years that I've been in, so that's what our customers are looking for, is that consistency and then the ability to just help them save time in their busy lives. When you think about the competition though, we still are losing clients daily to the lube centers. And so when you think about, okay, why am I still losing customers possibly to some of the lube centers? And, in my area, I see a new lube center pop up at least once every other month, it seems like. And when you look at their processes, they're very regimented. I did an exercise for myself recently. I said, rather than go to the dealership, let me go see what the experience is like at this particular lube center that's just popping up all over the place in my community. So I took a stab. I was due for an oil change. I said, okay, I'm going to go and see what that experience is like compared to the experience that we're providing at the local dealerships. And as I pulled in, I had a gentleman greet me. He walked me through my options. I was right there. I stayed in the car. He went through the multi-point check process. He pulled my filter. He's right there with me. He hands me the filter. He shows me, did the little flashlight test. So I was right there. That transparency was there. It was consistent. It was the same process. I looked to the bay beside me. They're doing the same exact process, right? So when we look at our competition, when it comes to lube centers, they are very regimented in their process. They follow it to a T with every vehicle that comes in. Well, can we always say that when it comes to our express centers within our dealerships or within the traditional realm of the dealership? In most situations, express service is just an individual that's, backed up. It looks a lot like the photo that I attached to the slide, right? We've got, our express tech, and he's 2 to 3 cars deep, and he's, trying to save time to be able to get through those vehicles to be able to meet those time requirements that some of our express lanes have. Well, that's why some of our customers are still deflecting to the lube centers. But I want you to keep in mind the word process, because you have the ability to be able to win those customers back and to retain the ones that you have. We just have to be able to nail down our processes. So when we think about how we can make those improvements in the express lane, I want you to consider going back to, when Express became a hot button years ago. It was, you want to have a wet tech and a dry tech, or a two tech tandem, just to be able to meet the time requirements. But when you think about the leveraging multimedia as far as photos and video, and the power that that has to bring the customer into your shop, because let's face it, when you go to those lube centers, they've got that bubble, or like my experience, I stayed in the car while they did the service. But if you have to get out of the car, they've got that nice glass window in the waiting area where you can stand right there on top of the technician and see everything that's happening. Well, we don't always have that ability within our dealerships. So that's where leveraging the use of media can help you bridge the gap there. And so rather than thinking wet tech, dry tech, think if I have a two-team tandem, or just teams in general within my express lane, who can I put in charge of leveraging the use of capturing that medium, so that way I can still deliver on my 29-minute oil change, but I can take it to another level with my 29-minute oil change. I have the ability to not only do it in 29 minutes, but also make solid recommendations in that time. Because oftentimes when I'm working with the dealers and we're reviewing our ASR attachments for the express lane, we see an opportunity there where the recs are generally going to be cabin air filter, engine air filter, because a lot of the time they're against the clock and they're just having to put something on there to make it stick and hope it sticks, right? Well, if you consider implementing this process, yes, your overhead may increase slightly, but you should be able to see a growth in your gross dollars captured on those express tickets to be able to justify the increase in labor being applied. So that's just a thought to throw out there, because as we think about where we're at in our climate right now, we're back in a position where, the fixed ops team is definitely a driver more than ever in our profit center, as we've got all of these shortages and things like that that are going on with vehicle inventory. So something for you to consider. Now, with that being said, we can't talk about a change in process without a pay plan discussion, right? When I was in the dealership, it was always, if I wanted to implement change the pay plan. And so, I can't stress the importance of taking a moment as you review your express lane process to also consider modifying the pay plan. And a lot of things can come out of modifying your express lane pay plan, because a lot of the times when I think of an express lane pay plan, it's really driven heavily off of spiffs, right? Our services as far as the fluid exchanges, or upselling of whatever particular focused item that we have for that given month. But when you think about how that fits into the development of some of your entry-level techs as they progress through their careers, I want you to think about what we're doing as far as reinforcing the behavior of looking for the spiff work instead of looking for the heavy work. So that's something that I want you to really take a moment and think about when you're reviewing your pay plans, is your pay plan indicative of growing that technician into becoming a line tech that knows how to go find heavy work, or will they grow into a behavior of looking for just the spiff items, so the flushes and the fluid exchanges? So with that being said, we're going to transition into discussing how we can increase efficiencies.
Gerald, if I could, folks, I don't have any questions that have come in yet, but if you joined us late, you have a question bar in your control panel. Just drop that down and feel free to put any questions you have or comments along the way. We'd love to take some time in between the sections and answer those questions. Sorry to interrupt, Gerald.
Not a problem at all. And so we're going to take a look at how we identify those barriers to our ability to increase our efficiency. And then we're going to take a look at how we can standardize our process. And then how training, once you have that standardized process, fits into being able to have a consistent customer experience and a consistent process that's going to drive efficiencies. And then we'll touch on how improving communication can kind of wrap all of this together for us. So before we get into it, I want to tell you a quick story about a technician at the very first My very first dealership I went into was a Nissan dealership, and this is before there was, a big push to offer technicians the 4-day work week, right? So I had a technician that worked literally 3 days a week. And coming into that dealership, I'm just like, okay, how is this guy working 3 days a week? But he produces the most hours out of all of the technicians in the shop. And so for me, I wanted to see what he was doing. It wasn't that I was concerned that he was stealing or anything like that. I wanted to see, what is it that you are doing that I can share with the rest of the shop? Because if you can achieve your hour output within 3 days of working, then how can I spread that across my entire shop, right? In fix, we always need more, or just in general. There's never a situation where I've got enough. We can always do more. We always want more. And so Chris's process was no wasted time. And for him, as a flat rate technician, he had it broken down to the point where he scheduled in his smoke breaks as he walked the lot to go find the keys to whether he was doing a PDI or a used car or a customer vehicle. He would factor that time into how long it would take him to smoke a cigarette, air out, and then proceed to doing his work. He was that efficient with his time. And it's not often that we see that in technicians that wants to do it by themselves. Usually you have to drive your techs towards that level of efficiency. But for me, it was a very eye-opening experience that, hey, if I can take these behaviors and apply them across the board to our team, then we'll be able to effectively increase our output across the board for our shop. So for me, that's really where I started to think different when it came to how we develop technicians, more so than just how to actually fix the car, but how to organize your day and how to help them identify the barriers to their ability to turn those hours that they're looking to turn each day. So with that being said, I started to do observations. So, how many hours are being spent doing unproductive things? And I think we all may know of that one tech at some point in our lives or experiences that just had a very messy toolbox, right? How much time is lost with you looking for a tool? Or how much time is lost with you standing in line at the parts counter or at the advisor's desk? Or when we think about Express, oftentimes they're entry-level hourly associates in some situations, and we end up pulling them off because we lost the porter for the day, or we don't have a shuttle driver and we've got a heat case situation where we need to get that customer somewhere. How often are those types of things happening in your service departments? Those are the type of things that we want to identify because they are costing you every day that we don't identify and find a solution to those problems. And just like anything, when you think about efficiencies, we can't be efficient in service and not be efficient in parts. It's a tango. The two departments work so closely together, especially when it comes to driving efficiencies, that we have to think about how we can improve that relationship when it comes to the level of support that your technicians are receiving from the parts department. Because we want to see how long is it taking to get those estimates quoted out, because that is a factor in our ability to actually get it back to the advisor and get the work sold. Extremely important when you think about the express lane, which is why with an inspect, fixed pricing is a lifesaver. And if you're not currently using fixed pricing, I definitely would recommend having that discussion about the items that you move the quickest through Express and setting them all up as a fixed price item. Your performance manager can help you go through and get those updated, but that's going to be one area that's going to save some time for your parts counter person from having to quote those items that you may already have family priced, but not set up properly within the inspection tool. Because when we're thinking about saving minutes, if I can save you a click or two, that's going to add up to a decent amount of time at the end of the day. So when you're looking at how to drive efficiencies, do not overlook the importance of spending some time and seeing how the parts department factors into the mix of your ability to move those ROs more efficiently through your shop. So once you've done your observations, it's going to be very important that you take a moment to standardize your process, especially when you think about express service where you're up against the clock because we've got an expectation as far as how quickly we need to complete the service. It is best to lay out in writing what your process is. And for me, a flow chart seemed to be the most natural way to approach this because, again, when we use a flow chart, the technicians are using that anyways, and they're familiar with it in diagnosing a car. So from a process standpoint, this looks familiar to most of our technicians. So if I take the time to write out my process in a flow chart as far as how we complete the multi-point inspection and what, if I see A, then I go this way. If I see B, I go this way. If I see C, I go this way. If we have that process written out and in stone, it is easier for you to not only onboard new hires, but also reinforce those behaviors when it comes to doing an observation. Now, some may think that, oh, it's too regimented, but that consistency is going to pay off in the form of customer retention and an increase in productivity and efficiency. So it is something definitely for you to consider once you've done those observations, is then take the time to standardize that process and write out a formal plan for your service department. Now that we've got a standard process, we've done our observations, this is the area where we have to continue observing and continue training. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the express lane sees the highest percentage of our RO counts. In some situations, 50 to 80% of the RO count is express. So when we think about that and we look at the fact that our express technicians are generally a lower level tech or entry level tech, we don't spend as much time as we probably should doing the observations in that area. And that's something that we have to shift away from. We have to shift away from the mindset of, okay, I'm going to have another technician teach this entry-level technician the way that we want our process executed. Well, while that may work in some facilities, it's definitely an area where, as the leader of that department, you want to take the time to do those observations and explain the why. Show them where the target's at and how to get there and why we need it done this way. And it will help tremendously in developing that talent that you're bringing in to hopefully keep within your dealership for years to come. So speaking of communication, I can't tell you how often I'll go into a call with a dealership or I sit in with some of my team members and listen to calls about breakdowns in communications and the things and the processes that we've put in place to improve communications. But when you really think about all of the different channels that we have to communicate today, we have to standardize, okay, what is going to be our method of communication? So as you can see, I listed out a number of different forms of communication that exist today within our dealerships, but we can all agree that if everyone is using all of these options to communicate, that things can get lost in translation or missed because we're not necessarily looking in the right place for that information. So less is more when it comes to communicating. Think through to see what is the most effective means of me communicating, and then just narrow it down to 2 or 3 tops. But that breakdown in communication generally comes from the fact that you've got so many different methods to communicate within the dealership that it leads to someone missing a form of communication because it hasn't been standardized. It's not in the process. So when you are writing out or developing your workflow process, keep in mind to think about how we need to communicate as we move through that flow chart and what methods of communication should be used. Doing so will help reduce the confusion and increase our ability to effectively make decisions and respond to those with questions. Next up, so now that we have our idea and our concepts in place as far as how we can improve our efficiencies, whether it be in Express or your main shop, we want to always be able to leverage the ability to set benchmarks, right? And so There are two reports that we're going to take a look at that are available within our Inspect tool. They're going to help you leverage the ability to monitor your throughput. The first is going to be our average time in mode. Now, this particular report is available based off of tracking by advisor and the technician. Based upon your processes and how you've designated what needs to be done, you can start at the top with dispatch, but the dispatch mode starts as soon as that RO is generated and imports into the inspection tool. That clock starts ticking. Yes, this is a 24-hour rolling clock. It is going to track that particular repair order as long as it's in that particular mode, no matter how long it sits there. And so I like to let everyone know that up front to let them understand that this is a gauge to measure how we're doing overall from a 30,000-foot view. It's not going to, yes, there will be one-off situations where, you know, things may have to sit for a moment or two, but I've highlighted the specific areas that this report will help you in driving efficiencies. And the first is going to be the inspection. So how long should that vehicle be in the inspection mode? That is something that, based off of your assessment and evaluation of your service department, you have to set that benchmark for. And so in this situation, it's 25 minutes. Once the technician gets the vehicle, it's an inspection 25 minutes. But then we look at the yellow box here and we can see how long should it be in the parts department? What is the expectation? What is our lead time for the amount of time that it should take for our parts associate to pick up the ticket? That's our waiting in parts. How long should it take for the parts associate to quote out the ticket, working in parts? And then completed in parts is just a combination of the time it took for us to be able to pick that ticket up, work it, and complete it. Those are all measurable things that feed into our ability to be efficient. And then we have to look at time to view. This is going to tell us that it's taking 49 minutes on average for the advisor to then view the estimate to provide it to the customer. So what is your benchmark there? And you can take all of these time metrics and add them up and say, okay, this is what my average customer experience looks like. And I say average because, remember, the clock runs for 24 hours. So it's not a true stopwatch that's off and on. So tracking these behaviors, just these three areas on this particular report, will help you identify where your barriers are at. So I always recommend to anybody that's looking to identify how they can be more efficient to start with this particular report, take a look at it from the advisor standpoint, take a look at it from the technician standpoint. That's going to lead you to where to start doing your observations. And then from there, you'll be able to identify those roadblocks and barriers through observation, and then put processes and systems in place to help remove them. And then you can come back to this particular report to monitor your progress.
Gerald, we do have a quick question on that last report if you want to go back a slide.
Yeah.
Eric Klein would like to know, are these average numbers? So where do those numbers come from? How did you aggregate those?
So this here is just honestly one of the dealerships that I work with. I went into their average time and mode section and I just pulled it. So this here is not a depiction of what average would be, because like I said, every dealership, every circumstance and layout is going to be slightly different. If someone asks for what should I target, it's hard to say from an inspection standpoint, because it's going to be based upon what your inspection process looks like. But generally, I would say anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, depending upon, again, the workflow mix, whether it's an importer or a domestic shop, is generally a decent window to be in within an inspection period. And then working in parts is going to have a number of factors that implement into that as well. Is everything set up for fixed price to bypass the parts department for those quick moving services? Or is the parts department having to quote out everything every time? That's going to factor into your average time and mode for your parts department. Does your parts department have a monitor, in their parts department, and they share the responsibility of grabbing those repair orders as they populate into the system? Or is there one person that's responsible for working the counter for retail? All of those are factors that factor in to your ability to set a benchmark when it comes to these reports. And then time to view. You think about your advisors, you stand there in the lane and you're watching, okay, are they always away from their desk? Or are they, constantly on the phone. There are a number of factors that factor into the time to view, but in that situation, you have to assess and determine what your customers are responsive to. So I would say work with your performance manager to really identify where those benchmarks are at. If you run it today, you can see where you're at today, and then you can kind of set an expectation of where you want to be, and then you can progress towards that. But a lot of this has to do with how clean you keep your dashboard as well. I will share that because if you have a ton of repair orders sitting on your dashboard, your mode times will be artificially inflated because those ROs may or may not still be within the system. So it is vital that you take the opportunity to make sure that your dashboard stays clean with current repair orders that should be open only, because that will impact these numbers.
Gerald, we've got 2 more questions we'll take now, and then of course everybody on the call today, please put all your questions in. We'd love to take them. It's the same question from Jim and from Brian, wanting to know if you've got any examples you could share with them of express pay plans that have worked for you.
Yeah, so with express pay plans, in my personal experience, I ran a 2-man tandem, so I had a wet tech and a dry tech. And for me, yes, we did have that spiff portion of it in their pay plan, but I also factored in a percentage of gross into their pay plan. And so I would take their team average between the 2 of them as far as the work sold under their express advisor, and I put a bonus payout on their gross dollar amount. That seemed to be the most effective for me because, again, going back to training and development, I didn't want to turn them into flush kings as they grew and developed into their careers. So I wanted to find a way to give them an element of, as they find that heavy work, and in my particular situation, the express advisor didn't necessarily have to TO the work. So I wasn't turning that over to a main shop advisor, a bit of a different circumstance there, but any way that you have the ability to incorporate a percentage of gross into the payout for those express techs definitely is a help to driving them to find true heavy work and not just going to satisfy the system by recommending flushes and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Jim and Brian, if you'll just respond back to that reminder email about that I sent about an hour and a half ago to you, and we'll poll the team and see if we can come up with some written stuff that we can copy and send out to you. It's a great question. All right, that's all the questions we have right now. Well, hold on. Let's see. I'm starting to get some more. Let me see real quick. Okay, perfect. So we're all caught up, Gerald.
Awesome. So our next report is going to tie directly back into our ability to see our shop broken down. It's going to be the team RO ASR report. And many of you that have our inspection tool may be familiar with our tech RO ASR report and our advisor RO ASR report. But within the inspection tool, we have the ability to split main shop and express technicians into subgroups. So the benefit that you're going to get here is when you run the team RO ASR report after having your store split into teams, which does take a moment to set up. Generally, I would say recommending working with your performance manager to just take your tech list and subdivide them into those particular teams, because then you can look at each individual team's performance rather than looking at everyone or just the individuals. So you can see, personalities factor into team assignments as well. So, there are a couple of things that you can see is, do you have the right people working together to be the most efficient and productive? So a lot of things can come out of your ability to set your teams up within the inspect tool to be able to then use the team RO ASR report. Because as you can see here, I've got an express lane team that's divided amongst a handful of technicians, but I have the ability to see of those express techs, who's getting the most ROs, how they're performing as far as their inspection rates and their ASR rates. But then in addition, I can still see my overall inspect average at the bottom that is completely separate from the main shop within this particular instance. So it is a report that, like I said, takes a little bit of setup, but will definitely give you a better view of where you want to go from an observation standpoint when you're thinking about your process. So those two reports are really the two most important reports that I would recommend using when you're thinking about throughput and process improvements. But my challenge to you all is after this to find time in your calendar. And when I say 3 to 5 observations a week, put them on your calendar. You set that time aside and dedicate it to going into your shop and just doing a handful of observations based off of what the reports are telling you. And then you can partner with your performance manager to set up a SMART goal, so that way you have something that's tangible and you can work with your team on moving the needle. So with that, that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. We'll open it up for any additional questions that may have come in.
Checking here, Gerald. Let's see if we got some more questions from the folks today. If no more questions, we'll hang out, of course, for as long as we need to if you're typing questions right now. But don't forget, the handout is located in the handout section right on your control panel if you'd like a PDF version of the presentation. Also, just reply back to that reminder. You got about an hour and a half to go for me if you'd like a recording of today's session. Let us check here. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Can you go back to the last slide, please? That comes from Tara. Tara, I'm not sure if you got a specific question. Are you trying to do a screen grab but feel free to do that, and also grab that handout. It's a PDF version. It's nice and pretty. All right. All right, Gerald, if you go ahead and push us to the last slide. And folks, in performance management, our sole goal in our group is just simply to work with you to maximize not only the utilization of our software, but the efficiency, process improvement. At the end of the day, we're just really here to help you make a little more money and retain your clients. That's what we're all about. There's Gerald's contact info, my contact info. If you don't know who your performance manager is, we'd be happy to get you that information. We'd be happy to work with you ourselves. So please feel free to reach out anytime. Don't see, well, hold on. Can you email me the slideshow? Brian, let me just jot your name down here. Absolutely, we'll email it to you. All right, I don't see any more questions. So Gerald, great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody have a great day, and we'll see you next time.